Good afternoon, Rotarians and guests. Welcome to the Rotary Club of Toledo. It gets there, you know, just got to be patient. Happy New Year, everybody. Glad to see everyone. It feels like it's been a couple months, but it's only been one. Hey. As we get started today, I'd like to ask Karen Stramel to come to the podium and deliver a reflection and lead us in the Pledge of Allegiance. Karen.
Happy New Year, Rotarians. Reflecting is an important part of the growth process. It enables us to critique the past and all that we have done or not, to learn more, so we are better prepared for the new year. We have a strong club and have seen some great growth in the past year. Let's keep the momentum going, invite some friends and colleagues to meetings, post on social media about upcoming speakers or events, but most importantly, get involved in the committees. We all join Rotary for various reasons. I was hoping to make connections with local businesses and along the way made some great friendships. I'm not lying. It is the truth. I encourage you to find a committee that speaks to your passions and join. The future of our club is dependent on your participation. I would be happy to talk to you about the Peace or the Environmental Committee. Hint, hint. As we focus on our personal, professional, or spiritual goals for 2024, let's keep in mind the four-way test. First, is it truthful? Second, is it fair to all concerned? Third, will it build goodwill and better friendships? And fourth, will it be beneficial to all concerned? And finally, I wanted to quote Joanne Raptis, "Be like a tree, stay grounded, connect with your roots, turn over a new leaf, bend before you break, enjoy your unique natural beauty, and just keep going." Thank you. I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
I kind of need those sometimes. Thanks, Karen. That was kind of a fun intro, segue, because I would like to now ask past President Alex Dew to come to the floor mic and lead us all in the four-way test. Alex?
Okay, this is the participation part of the program. So, please repeat after me. Is it the truth?
Is it the truth?
Is it fair to all concerned?
Is it fair to all concerned?
Will it build goodwill and better friendships?
Will it build goodwill and better friendships?
Will it be beneficial to all concerned?
Will it be beneficial to all concerned?
Thank you.
Thanks, Alex. Okay. As we begin our meeting, I'd like to thank and acknowledge Browning Cousineau as this month's meeting sponsor and Rotarian Brent Cousineau. So, Brent, I know you're traveling today, but thank you very much. Does anyone have any guests with them? If so, please come to the floor mic and introduce them.
President Travis, good afternoon. Excited to have my dear friend and colleague Alicia Wagner. She is an advocate for all things improvement, equality, women, and she is the host of a relatively newly launched podcast called the Mama Trauma Podcast, and it is fantastic. So encourage you to check it out. And she's here because of her mutual admiration for our guest speaker, Dawn Bentley.
Excellent. Welcome. Glad you could be here.
Hello, President Travis and fellow Rotarians. I have a guest today, Mallory Crooks. She is our new Donor Relations and Communications Specialist at St. Ursula Academy, and we are also here to support Dawn Bentley.
Excellent. Welcome, Mallory.
Thank you.
Hi, President Travis. Happy to be back to Rotary, especially on
see
a
you.
Don Bentley day. I have,
It's a national holiday.
yes, it's a special day for us all. I have marketing intern Marcus Peretti with me from Miami of Ohio here today.
Excellent. Welcome, Marcus.
Hello, President Travis and Rotarians. I am glad to have with me today Miss Erica White. She's the president and CEO of Fit Zone by Erica, and she's also a candidate for Ohio State Rep for the 41st District. So please welcome her.
Welcome. Glad you could be with us today.
Hello. Hello, fellow Rotarians. I'm Jessica Bowman with The Blade. I am here to introduce Miss Erin Simmons. She is currently the Public Relations Analyst for the Department of Public Utilities. Please welcome Erin.
Excellent. Welcome, Aaron. Okay. Good to see everybody here today. I'd like to call Raina Dawson and Jane Marie Ray to the floor mic for a Peace Committee announcement. I'll get there, Chuck. I'll get there.
Hi, I'm Raina Dawson. Good afternoon. Yes, it is officially afternoon. I'm the co-chair of the Peace Committee. Karen, who did the reflection earlier, is my co-chair, so we're excited. Our mantra and our theme for the year is Peace in Action, and we are here to announce our next Peace Committee project because we're going to get some work done, and we like to see it. Our winter donation drive for giving, I don't know if you've got the email or got the flyer for that. It's a beautiful thing. And it's launched on January 2nd. It ends on January 31st. So here is the brainchild of this beautiful idea. All the ideas cannot come from the chairs. We want to keep everyone active and involved. And, you know, let's get in the game. Let's see.
Thank you. So we reached out to the Jewish Senior Family and Social Services Food Pantry to ask for inclusion and diversity during the holiday season, and had a great conversation on some of the things that are needed. And it really did shock me because we're all used to, the mittens and the canned goods. And speaking to Ben, he really said they need a lot of can openers. And if you think about it, if you're homeless and you get cans of food, a lot of them don't have the tabs. So a really inexpensive thing you can buy at the dollar store. Readers and cheaters, again, if you think about, we all probably have those. I hide them. But again, something that can be easily picked up and donated. And then thank you so much, Chuck, for your donation. We really appreciate what you're donating, again, to help out. And then if you see the Target, Meijer, and Walmart cards, you might be thinking, well, are you going to give those to the individuals? They actually use those for the individuals that are in the social services program. So individuals might have a need at home that they can't purchase something. So the social services worker will go, and they are very adamant about keeping track of where those dollars are being spent. If you're like me, it may be where you think this is a great thing, but you keep forgetting every Monday. We'll be collecting every Monday. You can give Jackie cash probably, or you can make a donation, and they can go out and make some purchases on that. So again, if you can remember to put that on your to-do list to pick up some of these items and drop them off next month or the following Monday, or we'll take cash today as well. So thank you so much.
Thank you. Thank you. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Thank you to the Peace Committee for all the work you guys are doing. You're doing a fantastic job. Appreciate it. Okay. What do you think, Chuck? You want to do this? All right. Past District Governor Chuck Stocking, would you please come to the floor, Mike, to introduce a foundation video?
Thought you'd never ask. I highly recommend this position. You get a chance to be upfront and personal with all our
You
guests.
know more
which
people
is
than I do
awesome.
now. Yeah.
If you're selling insurance or something, it's a particularly good point. We ought to be able to make some revenue on that, don't you think? Well, it's my pleasure to continue to encourage support for our foundation. And for those of you who are guests, every year we contribute about $250,000 from this club, from the money that's been raised and the interest on the fund that's being managed at Greater Toledo Community Foundation. And we do some awesome projects. And today we're going to have one of the little video projects, which video segments on some of those projects that Phil Marissy has been producing for us. and Jim Lehman is the host of the session. So thanks for your support. We'll have an announcement about our challenge grant. I would tell you, though, that we have exceeded, we're in that, what we call the CIM period, which is check in the mail period, where we know that there's stuff still coming in. So, and the other one, that's the quiet period. If you're going public, you have this quiet period. And then we have a couple gap closers that have asked to be informed about if we have a gap between our goal and where we are, that they would consider helping to fill the gap. So that's really good news. So anyway, I'll welcome Jim Lehman and the video. So.
Why do I support the Toledo Rotary Club Foundation? My first experience was with the Community Service Committee, doing actual site visits and getting to know and become advocates for various grant applicants. That really showed you where the rubber meets the road as far as our grants being used in the community.
Impacts like the College and Career Access Program, a focus of Toledo Tomorrow. They work with students, their families, and high school and post-secondary learning institutions. The goal is to increase educational attainment and to make financial aid, scholarship, and college application resources readily available. Our $6,500 grant will extend Toledo Tomorrow's programming from high school seniors to juniors and will expand the overall program throughout Northwest Ohio.
There's a broader part of being a Rotarian, and that is the fact that our mission is to really make a difference in our community. And that's why I support our foundation.
Your Toledo Rotary Foundation. Impact in action.
Thank you, Chuck. Thank you to the foundation. Jim, well done. Again, we've been bringing this up pretty much on a weekly basis, but if you have not, please consider contributing to this year's foundation goal. Again, this is how we make over $250,000 of impact in our community every single year. So your participation is truly appreciated. So again, thank you. Next up, I get to do one of my favorite things in this role, which is I get to acknowledge some of our fellow Rotarians and some of their accomplishments, and we've got some fun ones this month. So I'd like to start with Dr. Shanda Gore, has been awarded the Community Change Agent Award presented by Alpha Kappa Alpha Sorority Incorporated. So congratulations, Shanda. Julia Hage, are you here today? Hey, there you are. Hey, Julia. Julia has been promoted to Director of Mission Advancement at Ann Grady Services, so congratulations. And I have not seen Kunal, but congratulations to Kunal Duar, who has officially been named President and CEO of Walt Churchill's Market. Walt will now be the chairman of the board, so congratulations to both of those gentlemen and everybody at Walt Churchill's. As many of you know, we have been supporting a youth exchange student, Monique, who is over in Slovakia right now. And last month, she sent over some photos of her updates so far. So she celebrated a birthday. So the big 19, I believe, if I'm not mistaken. But she's been going to different cities. She's participated in her host family's traditions. So that's been kind of neat for her. So, like I said, I even had her birthday. So. We keep looking forward to hearing more and more out of Monique, but she's having such a neat, unique experience over there. So anyway, with that, I have nothing else. So I would like to introduce Dr. Shanda Gore to come up and introduce our speaker today.
Thank you, President Travis and fellow Rotarians. It is truly my honor to introduce Dawn Bentley. I'm going to tell you a little bit about her. Won't go into too many descriptions, but I want to make sure that you know what you're about to hear today. Dawn Bentley was born and raised here in Toledo, and she is the founder and the president of CARE. She attended Miami University, received her bachelor's in early childhood, early intervention, special education, and she began her teaching career while receiving her master's degree. Dawn has experience not only in the classroom, but also as an interventional developmental therapist and working in leadership in the nonprofit sector of the disability field. She has 2 daughters, and she and her husband welcomed twin sons during the pandemic they lovingly refer to as the twindemic. CARE works with local community organizations who have vested interests in accessibility and inclusion, specifically for people with disabilities. CARE offers accessibility audits, consultation services, training opportunities, speaking engagements, assistance, and event planning. Dawn saw the opportunity to educate the community and bring awareness of underserved populations, and she specifically is focused on the disability community, especially for those in businesses and organizations that have a desire to provide accessibility programs. Dawn is a member of the Human Relations Commission and the DEAI Alliance. I also want to point out a couple of things that she didn't say about herself. She also was in the Toledo Blade. If folks are reading the Toledo Blade, you would have seen this great article about Dawn about a week ago. And she also was a guest on the Penn Leader podcast, which is one that I host, when we talked about examining accessibility. So if you get a chance, please check that out. So many words and pearls of wisdom. So without further ado, please welcome Dawn.
Thank you. Thank you. Hello, everybody. Good afternoon. I'm excited to be here. I am a fellow Rotarian, but I've been coming to meetings for years. I'm going to try to work the PowerPoint. I've been told this can be tricky, so I might have to give the wink if I need them to move it for me. So I'm going to start with the fact that this has always been my story. That picture is a picture of my family, and in the middle is my brother. My brother and I were actually campers at a camp that was hosted by Toledo Rotary, and it was Easter seals, I think, back in the late 80s. And then there was a Toledo Blade article about an accessible pathway that the Rotary sponsored, and my brother was one of the people who was asked to be part of that photography experience, accessing the pathway. So fast forward to 2000, I graduated high school and I went to Miami of Ohio, which I know we have a fellow Miami student here. Don't do what I do and change your major in the middle, because my parents were not thrilled about it. But I started out in accounting and finance, and it was that summer that I worked at a summer camp called Camp Cricket for Tim Harrington. And I fell in love with the whole idea of this becoming a career. I never had thought about it being a career. My brother had cerebral palsy and was a wheelchair user, and I myself am someone who identifies as having an invisible disability or a non-visible disability. And so it had never struck me. It was such a part of my personal life. I mean, I was born into the world of educational meetings, and I was born into the world of therapies and service support and home visits, that it never dawned on me that I could do this as a career. And so after working for Tim that summer, I switched my major to early intervention and special education and continued to work for him on and off over the years. I became camp director. I eventually became youth director there. And then I went back into education. And it was during that time that I met my husband, who's actually from Pittsburgh. I don't know if there's any Steelers fans in the audience, but we're pretty excited about this week. I'm not so much, but I'm very supportive. I'm more of a college football girl. But his job kind of bounced us around, and we landed back in Toledo, my hometown, in 2019. And it was at this time that Tim Harrington asked me to come and back and work for him. I think he made a joke with Sam Meldon that I divorced him 10 years ago, and he was begging me to come back, and of course I did. I was really excited about the opportunity. And then the pandemic happened, right? And it rocked everybody's world. And just 2 months before the pandemic happened, we found out we were unexpectedly expecting twins. So we were just, all around, our world was kind of in upheaval. And, we had babies that were in the NICU, they were preemies, they were both diagnosed with hemophilia within a couple hours after birth. And so the idea of going back to work full-time while navigating this world was incredibly daunting, to say the least. And it was at that time that my husband and my dear friend Sam both encouraged me, why don't you do this on your own? And then you can, create your hours and you can balance it with being at home with the kids. And I was like, why don't I? And that was when CARE was born. And so CARE stands for Community Access, Inclusion, Representation, and Equity. And access is something that I'm so incredibly passionate about, and it's really what I want to talk to all of you about today. Now the reality is that, oh geez, I'm not here to do a training, right? I mean, you've probably all sat through many of those before. But I really want to give you the knowledge and the power to walk away from today making informed decisions about what your organizations are doing in the world of access, and also how you're training your employees. You know, what does that look like, and are you doing it with fidelity? So words like DAI, best practice, access, inclusion, universal design, these are really common buzzwords, right? All of us are using them right now in our marketing. They're incredibly popular to be using right now. But I want to know if we're really thinking about what do they actually mean? You know, are they something that we're saying and we're using because that's what we're supposed to be doing right now? Or are we really making them part of our workplace culture? So diversity, equity, access, inclusion. Those words are pretty self-explanatory, right? But best practices, I hear this word thrown around quite often when I'm talking to people. You know, we're using this best practice training, or we're using this best practice strategy. But at the end of the day, if it's not evidence-based, research-based, peer-reviewed, that's what makes it a best practice. And I heard a quote from someone who also works in the DAI space in Toledo, and it really resonated with me. And that is that common does not always equal best. And so I think sometimes we confuse that, especially as we're looking for the next big thing, the next training. We confuse, you know, because everybody's doing it, it must be great, right? And not always. It doesn't always mean that it's the best practice to be implementing. Access and inclusion, those are two other words that I hear thrown out interchangeably quite often. And the reality is that these two terms have very different meanings. So access allows someone to enter. It gives them the means to participate. They have a seat at the table that meets their needs that they're able to use. But inclusion fosters that sense of belonging. It gives them a voice while they're at that table. So just because they can access the table doesn't mean that we're including them in the conversation that's being had. And I think it's really important for us to remember that as we move forward, that those have to be used hand in hand, but they're not the same thing. So universal design or universal access, how many of you are familiar with that concept? Okay, I always get really excited when I don't see a lot of hands raised, because usually it means you're gonna be really interested in what I have to say, and it's not gonna be something that you've heard over and over and over again. So the whole concept of universal design or universal access is that anybody can participate and can access your space, your program, your service, your employment opportunities, regardless of perceived barriers. Perceived barriers being age, race, religion, sexual preference or orientation, and disability. So, how many of you have heard of the curb cut effect? Has anybody heard of that? So the curb cut effect is something that we use in the disability community, and that is a perfect example of why universal design or access works really effectively. So curb cuts were designed for people who use mobility devices. They were designed for people with wheelchairs and walkers to access one sidewalk, cross the street, and access the next. But what they found is once they were implemented, everybody benefited. You know, a parent or a guardian who was pushing a stroller, someone who was, you know, running from one flight to the next and had rolling luggage, skateboarders, you name it, everybody benefited from the curb cuts. And so that is the whole idea behind universal design, is that everybody benefits. It really doesn't take away from anyone, but everyone can access it. I'd also imagine that a lot of you are familiar with the ADA, or the Americans with Disabilities Act. I don't know how many of us realize, though, that the ADA is over 30 years old. And so the reality is I've met with so many organizations, so many people who say, very proudly, we're ADA compliant. We're completely ADA compliant. And it's a great first step. I don't want to take away from that. But the reality is there's a lot of spaces and programs that are considered ADA compliant by law, by definition of the law, that people with disabilities still can't access. because there are a lot of things that didn't exist when the ADA was written. One example that I use a lot in my trainings is that I have a dear friend who happens to be a power wheelchair user who also has a service dog who was accessing an ADA compliant doorway by the definition of the law, and the dog became tangled in the wheelchair wheels. Everybody was okay, but it was a really traumatizing experience for both of them. And the reality is that the measurements of that doorway, by law, it was accessible, but it wasn't. And so that's where universal design and universal access takes that ADA compliance and just takes it a little step further. So if you're really serious about access in your organization, in your workspace, or even in your personal life, I always encourage people to really take that ADA compliance and consult with someone on taking it that next step further and making it universally designed. The other thing I like to say is, you know, the ADA, it should be celebrated and it should be recognized. I mean, the reality is that it opened the doors for people with disabilities, and it really made access become a forefront of a lot of discussions. And so for that reason, it should absolutely be recognized. What I challenge you to do, though, after today is to take that sort of status quo and take it to the next level. So, what does this have to do with you? One of the things that I love to lead with is, you know, the disability community is one of the few marginalized communities that anybody could become a member of at any moment. It does not discriminate against anyone. And so the reality is that 1 in 4 people will experience a disability in their lifetime. That's a lot of us in this room, right? And that's not even including your children, your parents, your partner, your spouse, your best friend, you know, other people in your circle who could be impacted by that statistic. So what does this have to do with all of us in this room? Relevance. All of us who work for an organization are constantly striving to stay relevant. And the reality is that truly investing in a culture of belonging is going to be what separates your organization from other organizations as you move forward. I had this conversation with Kevin, you know, last week, that our generation, and especially our children's generation, they're starting to be aware of these things, and it's part of their everyday, even in school. And so if we are not looking at what we're doing as adults and keeping it relevant, when they're the ones who are coming into employment, they're going to be challenging you, right? Whether it be with their checkbooks, whether it be with their time, and you're going to have to question, you know, whether you're staying sustainable, and you're going to continue to be relevant moving forward in this workplace culture. And so it's critical to recognize and value equitable access. You know, there's a lot of information out there that by 2050, the US is going to be majority minority, meaning it's going to be a mix of all of the marginalized communities, and that includes people with disabilities. So this is why it's so important for us to take these, you know, quote unquote buzzwords and really invest in them as being part of our culture in our organizations. So, I'm going to give an example. So a common practice is disability simulations. How many of us in this room have participated in disability simulation, right? I know we just had this conversation, Mark. I mean, I will be honest, I've written a few, and I also have implemented a few. You know, when I was working for Tim for 20 years, that's what we leaned on for educating the public and the community on people with disabilities. Wheelchair basketball and football games, wearing a blindfold and using a white cane, using noise-canceling headsets are all examples. I mean, these have existed for decades. So my next question is, how many of you in this room know that there's a ton of evidence out there that actually debunks the fact that these are an effective practice? Not many? Okay, so a couple of you. So the reality is that, you know, I as a professional rely heavily, especially being a teacher, we were so driven by data. And so if there is a evidence-based, data-driven model that is showing that this has a harmful impact, I always challenge, you know, why are we still using it? That's my professional hat. Personally, my personal stance is there is not any other marginalized community that we would ever suggest simulating their lived experience as a form of education. I mean, if you sit with that for a minute, it's pretty uncomfortable, right? As it should be. And so I always, challenge people, why is it okay and acceptable for us to do that to the disability community? So here's just a couple of the articles that talk about the dangers of disability simulation. And I'm going to read my notes because I want to get this one right. In 2014, scientists from the University of Colorado Boulder published results that showed that people without disabilities who participated in these simulation exercises reported and rated people with disabilities as less competent after they completed the simulations, and they were more likely to buy into the negative stereotypes about people with disabilities. So that's pretty staggering, right? And you could go down a rabbit hole with how many of these studies exist. And so, they found that these simulations promote negative stereotypes of helplessness, pity. They fostered feelings of fear and misunderstanding in the people without disabilities, and that's only some of their results. The other thing that they talk a lot about, which I think is really interesting, especially today as we sit here, the world of disabilities has evolved pretty tremendously. 20 years ago, gosh, even 10 years ago, we weren't talking about mental health. We weren't talking as much about non-visible disabilities. We weren't talking as much about ADHD and autism and OCD and PTSD, and I could go on and on and on. Chronic illnesses that we've seen, as a result of different illnesses that may cause someone to have an autoimmune disorder. All of those things are things that you can't represent in a simulation. So you're leaving out a whole group of disability when you're doing these simulations. So I go back to common does not always equal best, right? This is a very common practice that a lot of people are using nationally, and there's all of these studies pointing to the fact that they're not effective. So what do we do instead? It's just like it's really common for architects to use ADA compliance and ADA standards as a checklist when they're building a new building. But the reality is we've seen people with disabilities still not be able to access those buildings. So common does not always equal best. The ADA is amazing, but universal design is really best practice. So what can you do? Become an ally. The catch is that you should be relying on evidence-based best practices, but how? So get to know someone with a disability. I know Mark and I had this conversation before my presentation. It's one of the simplest, most effective ways to get to know the disability community is getting to know someone who identifies as having a disability. Invest in training. If you're scheduling a training, ask a few questions. Ask what are their evidence-based practices? What are their strategies for training? Make sure that the trainer is someone who has a background and they're a knowledgeable expert in the disability field. It's a bonus if they happen to be someone who also has a disability themselves. Host a panel discussion. Lunch and learns are a really hot thing right now. Have a lunch and learn where you invite a group of panelists with various disabilities and allow them the opportunity to speak to their experience and to field questions. Your hiring practices. There are so many statistics out there about hiring people with disabilities and their benefits. What we often don't look at is the statistics about why people with disabilities aren't disclosing their disability at certain jobs because they are fearful. They're fearful of being stigmatized. They're fearful of retaliation. There are some studies out there that say up to 80% of people with non-visible disabilities have not disclosed them to their employer. And the reason is they're afraid of the repercussions. They're afraid of what's going to happen if they disclose that disability. So we have to change our hiring and our employment practices so that people with disabilities feel valued and needed in our workplace culture, even with accommodations. There's some other ways too. There's podcasts that you could check out. A really good one is called The Accessible Stall by Emily Ladow. It's a really great podcast. I highly recommend it. There's lots of books out there. I can give you a handful of great children's recommendations, but for this group, I would say Demystifying Disability is an awesome one. Highly recommend that book. Sitting Pretty and Disability Visibility are two others that are great educational reads. Attend a human library event. Encourage the library to host a human library event specific to people with disabilities. Another great way to be an ally. There's also the documentary Crip Camp. I don't know how many of you have seen it. I will say it is not a family-friendly documentary. It gets pretty intense, but it's a documentary about the disability pioneers who were really the catalyst to the ADA becoming a law. And it's a really cool documentary. It follows their experience at a summer camp. They lovingly called it Crip Camp. And it shows the human side of disability. It shows that people with disabilities still enjoy relationships and sexual relationships. People with disabilities do drugs. I mean, this was back in the 60s, but it demonstrates how people with disabilities aren't separate from the human experience. They are part of it, and they have the same feelings that people with disabilities, people without disabilities have. Really recommend that one as well. So, in closing, the Toledo Rotary has been an instrumental role and profound impact on the disability community in Toledo. I'm here today because of the Toledo Rotary and because of what evolved into the Ability Center. And the legacy and the history are incredibly deep. We all know that, right? What I'm asking or challenging you to do is work with me and with others in Rotary to balance honoring that legacy while continuing to move the needle forward with making sure that Toledo is an accessible community to people with disabilities. And it is a balancing act because we have to think forward. And I loved Karen, was it Karen who gave the opening remarks? I love that she kind of went along that same thread of we have to keep making forward progress because that is the reality and it's a difficult thing to balance is honoring that rich history and that legacy with making sure that we stay relevant. And that is something that the disability community desperately needs us to do. So I'm not sure if we are doing questions. Okay, and if anyone wants to get in touch with me after this or ask more questions, did I do that using my clicker? Did I just, okay, thank you. I'm like, wow, this thing is magic. Feel free to reach out and contact me. I'd be happy to connect with anybody. So thank you. Hi.
Hi, Dawn. Thank you so much for taking the time to share with us all this information. And I know you and I have had numerous conversations because we're both in this field of work. So when we think about, asking the questions versus making the assumptions about what individuals with disabilities may need, what would you say from a nonprofit and then also in a for-profit instance, what is the best first step to take to be better? And I know it's a really big question, but what's the best first step to say, how can we better understand our employees? How can we better create, a welcoming environment for people to feel comfortable? How can we be better?
Yeah, I love that question. And there's so many ways. So for starters, from an internal perspective, I would say employee resource groups are a great start. I'm sure most of you are familiar with employee resource groups, but especially having one specific to people with disabilities or to your employees with disabilities would show, that you're supporting them in their experience as an employee. And then from an outward perspective, I would say having a welcoming statement on your website. It can be as simple as that to demonstrate like, hey, we're trying to move this needle forward. And I think what you'll find is most people in the disability community are going to appreciate that it's a work in progress, right? I always say when it comes to access, especially now with where we've come, it's a marathon, not a sprint. You're not gonna be able to change things overnight, but even just showing that you have a vested interest and commitment to it, I think is a huge first step. And I always say, people don't know what they don't know, but always challenge yourself. If you now know better, are you doing better? Thank you.
Hi, my name is Erin Simmons, and I work with the Department of Public Utilities. And currently, we are working on making sure that our affordability portal, as well as our bills, are obviously ADA compliant, but also you were saying that it goes above and beyond that, and I just was wondering what type of resources you have available for us to be able to check into those as well.
Oh yeah, I would love to share some resources. Yeah, if you look up universal design or universal access, and even like specific to the area you work in, there's usually quite a few. But if you want to reach out to me, I'd be happy to help find some of those reputable resources as well. Yeah.
So I'm going to put you on the spot.
Oh, great. This wasn't part of the deal. No, I'm just kidding.
This could be great. So this morning I, open up the Blade online and I see the restaurant report cards, and I love looking at them. I actually like looking at them more for the violations than the folks who get it right. So I'm not going to do that to you and ask you for the violations, but I'm curious, in our community, in our market, maybe even outside of our market, who are the folks that you think we should be benchmarking against that do it right, that are using those best practices, that are the organizations or institutions that we should say, okay, that's the right way to do it? If you want to get into the other one, I'm going to let you, but.
No, you know what? This is a really interesting question, and I'll tell you why it's interesting. So as Dr. Gore mentioned, I'm part of the DEI Alliance, and we were having some discussions as a group that it's interesting because there are organizations who are doing it really well. As far as like someone who's absolutely nailing it, like just driving home the message, I think it's such a work in progress because it depends on who you talk to. So like from a disability perspective, there may be some organizations out there that I'm like, wow, they're really moving the needle forward. But then you might talk to someone from the LGBTQ plus community who's like, yeah, but then, they don't have an ERG for this group, or they don't have a statement, for our group. And so I think that's a really tricky question because I think there are a lot of organizations who are trying, right, to get it right. And again, because it's a marathon, not a sprint, they're making forward progress, but there's still work to do. Some of the organizations, like I'm currently working with Toledo Lucas County Public Library. I think they're a great example of someone who they haven't always gotten it right, but they're certainly trying to improve, right? Same with the metro parks. I would say a lot of like our big staple institutions, Toledo Museum of Art. Toledo Museum of Art hired someone specific to disability access, which is huge. I mean, they're one of the first organizations in our area to do that. That is definitely a great first step and shows that commitment to access. And that would be another thing that I would recommend if you are working for a company or an organization and wanting to show a vested interest, having someone that is specifically overseeing your DEI initiatives would be a great first practice or first step, and making sure that disability is included in that. I know I've had a lot of conversations, like Julia and I have talked about it. A lot of people, when they think of diversity, equity, access, and inclusion, they aren't thinking disability. They sometimes separate that from the group, and it's very much a part of those initiatives. So I know that doesn't totally answer it, but I think my answer would be, I truly think Toledo is a work in progress. I mean, I know Tim Harrington had this vision and this dream of us becoming the most accessible community in the country, and I definitely think that it's possible because Toledo, my husband jokes that he's never been anywhere where it's such a small town in a big city. He's like, it is not 6 degrees of separation here, it's 1. And he joked with me that it's good that I married someone from out of the state, or I'd probably be distantly related to them because everybody knows everybody in Toledo. But I think that works to our benefit, right? Because we're all trying to help each other get and be better. And so I do think it's possible. I just don't know that I would name someone right now.
I just had a really quick question about, I know you mentioned that being ADA compliant isn't necessarily where everyone should be, and that there's kind of like a next step. So what can be done, or where can you move the needle to get that change? Because it sounds like that needs to change in order for other businesses to kind of really take note or make those necessary changes, because again, they're just, oh, well, I'm compliant, so we're good, let's just move on. So what can be done, to kind of move that needle forward?
Yeah, I think one thing that can be done is having an audit. I know, like the Ability Center will do ADA access audits on, your physical access facilities. But even in that conversation, asking them, can we take it a step further and look at universal design? There's this common misconception and myth that in order to make something universally accessible, it's going to cost a tremendous amount of money. And that's actually very untrue. I've even talked to several architects who have worked with me to debunk that. If you are building a new facility, if you are renovating, if you are starting a new program, if you are rewriting your employee handbook, that is a perfect opportunity to take it that step further and to look at making something universally accessible versus compliant. And don't get me wrong, I mean, if there is someone who's not even ADA compliant, that is like our first, ask is like, can we at least get to this point? But if you are someone who really believes in access and really believes in inclusion and belonging, especially for your employees, I think it's really important that you're thinking kind of beyond those minimum standards. And so I think the time to do it is especially if you're talking about something new, because it's not going to cost you any more to take it that step further than it would be if you were to go with the minimum standard. Now, if you're trying to retrofit something, then it's gonna look a little bit different. But I would say lean on, local organizations who are doing that and kind of, check in with them. If it's like a sister or a brother organization that you're kind of on the same playing field with, you could check in with them and find out, who they talked to, who they had audit them. And if not, then, maybe talking to someone in the field who could come in and do an audit for you. That was me, sorry.
So no, it's a great setup for my kind of question that I have. There's sort of a theme of physical spaces I'm noticing, but in the world of technology, there's a lot of things that are now advancements for visually impaired and other disabilities people have. One of them that I was familiar with only up until a few months ago was ADA compliant websites.
Yes.
That now exist, and even large corporations are starting to get onto this, the track of this. What familiarity do you have with that, and how can businesses improve? Even small sites like Wix and self websites are now integrating this technology in their platform. So, what can you share with us?
Yeah, one thing I can share is to do your homework with that, right? Because I'm actually in the process of launching my website. And it's been how many months? But the reason that it's taking me so long is for that exact reason, because the platform that I'm going through claims to be accessible. But when I just so happen, my cousin's wife is a web accessibility expert. And so when I ran it by her, she was like, nope, they don't do this, they don't do that, they don't do this. And then some of the overlays that you can purchase for like, so many hundreds of dollars a year, some of those aren't even fully compliant either. So that would be another area where I would say before you invest, hundreds or thousands of dollars into web accessibility, really, consulting with an expert who's not trying to sell you a product, but is really just trying to make sure you have the right product. Because there's a lot of overlays and a lot of, companies that are saying, that they have, the accessibility features, and then what we're finding is when you do a deep dive, they're not fully compliant. So I would definitely check in with someone first on like the disability side of things who isn't trying to sell you their website before you invest in that. But I think that's a really good point. I mean, that's what's so interesting about the world of access is it extends far beyond, the walls of this building. I always say part of why I found my niche and what I'm doing is being a classroom teacher and having to build curriculum and programs and services. I always say to organizations, it's great if someone can get into your building, but then what does it look like once they're in the doors? Do your employees know how to interact with them appropriately? What does it look like if you hire someone with a disability? Does HR know the best practices for hiring and for implementing employment? What about your programs, your services? Are those designed in a way, whether it's a class that they can take or a training, are they designed in a way where people can access them? Your website, social media, the world of social media, we're all posting stuff, especially on behalf of our organization. Are you using alternate text options? Are you using image descriptions so that people can access that information and you can expand your reach?
Ridiculously amazing presentation. Thank you. As the mother of a daughter with an invisible disability, I just wanted to talk further about, 1 in 2 kids currently in America have a chronic disease. And so a lot of these issues with generations coming up, right, they're going to have these invisible disabilities. And so we often talk about the individuals who are going through disability, but oftentimes we forget the caregiver. And so I think just good information for people in the room that 1 in 2 kids have a chronic illness. And so as we sit here as business owners or managers, it's like, well, is this something that I really have to worry about in my organization? And it might not be, Right now, I still think it merits, right, better understanding what it takes to be compliant, or how many employees didn't even raise concerns, right? So you brought that up, but I wondered what recommendations you might have right now for individuals in the room that our kids are a stone throw from hitting the workforce, and 1 and 2 are going to have a chronic illness and a potential invisible disability. But what recommendations could you give at this point with 75% of employees, they're caregivers? And so a lot of these parents right now, right, we talk about an engagement, or, being able to get more employees, engaged and at work longer, but I see so much correlation into all of this. So what recommendations or training would you also put towards support for caregivers?
Yeah, I think that's a really good question and a really good point. And it's interesting because I know when COVID happened, one of the silver linings that people with disabilities took away from it is that it brought forth so many options for accessibility, right? We found that some people could work from home and still be incredibly productive. We found, in fact, there was a joke with myself and a couple colleagues when we were still at the Ability Center, that there were a couple days when we were working from home, we felt more productive because you didn't have 25 people coming in and out of your office the entire day, so you were able to just put your nose to the computer and get stuff done. Having hybrid meeting options, right? So you have an employee who has a child with chronic illness who can't always be in the office, but they might be able to Zoom in on an important call or an important meeting. I think giving people grace and understanding that most people are really well-intentioned while also giving options, right? So it doesn't have to be everybody's in the office Monday through Friday from 8 to 5, or everybody's in this meeting room, having this meeting. Maybe they can call in, they could Zoom in. I think that's a really great first step. And then, from there, I think definitely looking into training opportunities and then making sure that your leadership is a part of that. I think what oftentimes happens is, especially I've seen it in the social service world, you may hire someone in HR or in marketing or, another background, finance, who doesn't have any background in the work that you're doing. But oftentimes those people aren't going through the same training that your employees are going through. I think it's really important to make sure your entire workforce is knowledgeable and trained in some of these areas, and not just your employees, because usually the decision makers are the ones who need to have that knowledge.
Dawn, can you elaborate on what an ADA website is?
So that is one area that I'm not an expert in, is web design, but there are certain compliance standards for websites. And then of course you can take it beyond that, but having, for example, features where it can be read back to a person, features where they can enlarge the print so that they can see it on a bigger scale. Making sure, the simple thing that a lot of us don't even realize is using accessible fonts. So anytime, you're putting something on your website, you're making a brochure, we've all seen people make these really fancy, beautiful flyers for programs that they have coming up, but if they're not using an accessible font and there's no alt text option, there's a lot of people, whether they're a non-reader or someone who has a vision disability, may not be able to access it. So there's a whole host of standards that fall under the compliance for a website. But again, there's other things that can kind of take it a step further. But I'd be happy to share resources. I have a personal reference that is amazing when it comes to compliance of websites that I'd be happy to share.
Just want to say, I might be biased, but great presentation.
Thank you.
Great presentation. One piece that I know you asked the question, and I heard it earlier, is again what people can do. And one of the, I want to get your opinion and thoughts too, is cultural assessments. Doing engagement surveys, because allowing individuals within your organization to self-identify if they choose to, or in an anonymous way, and just to share that they exist, and then giving them a voice to have that. And especially if they can make recommendations to help whatever environment they're in. What are your thoughts about cultural assessments and engagement surveys?
It's really interesting you asked that. So I had a previous employer who did one, and then were unhappy with the responses, and HR is trying to figure out who respond. And I think that is number one, is I think they can be so effective and so meaningful if the leadership is willing to come face to face with the results And it needs to be given in a safe space, right? The employees need to know we genuinely want your feedback. This isn't going to be held against you. And then be prepared to take that feedback and to, come up with a serious plan for how you're going to address it, right? Because I've seen so many times where they're implemented and employees are completely honest and employers don't want to hear what they have to say. But I think when they're on the same page with this is going to lead to some difficult discussions, I think they can be incredibly effective, especially with the way we're moving forward with looking at how marginalized communities exist within our greater community. People with disabilities have a right and want to live, play, and work in the community just like anybody else, but we have to make sure that our culture represents that. And so I think the survey is a great first step, knowing that it may lead to a hard discussion.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Much. That was flat out amazing. I appreciate it so much. As I'm sure you've seen before, we'll be presenting you with Historical Tales of Toledo, authored by past President Clint Mock, and we'll also be making a donation in your name to the Polio Plus campaign. So thank you so much for being here today. I cannot tell you how excited I am to see everybody in the room today. It's been nice given the break. So on that note, we will not be having a meeting next week. In honor of Martin Luther King Day. So, however, in 2 weeks, we will be joined by Lieutenant Governor John Husted. So that should be a interesting presentation. So we will see you on January 22nd. We're a little busy this afternoon. We have 4 committee meetings. We have program committee meeting in Summit A, membership meeting in Summit B, disability services in Summit C, and youth services in Summit D. For all those who are maybe not on a committee currently, today's a great day maybe to go check one out. Step in, see what it's all about. But with that, we are adjourned. Have a great week, everybody.